no one has the answer. And so you can talk to a lot of people and be like, hey, I don't know, like, what do you think? And I think it's a great, unifying factor in many ways. So I embrace it. Every day I realize how little I know, and that's just part of the journey, right?
Hello, welcome along to the Founded and Grounded podcast with me, Laura Rawlings, and business startup coach, Ollie Collard. Hi, Ollie.
Hey, Laura, how you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you today?
Very well, yeah. I can't believe we're at the end of season 4 of Founded and Grounded. It's been quite a journey.
I know. I feel like I want to kind of look back and sort of comb through some of the key things that have come out, because undoubtedly at various points, usually in every episode actually, there's something that I take away, and then a few days later I'll be doing something completely different, and I'll be like, the words from Founded and Grounded from our founder will pop in my head, and I'll be like, that's what I must do. That's what they were talking about when they said that. This is the time to channel this wisdom. But yeah, there's been so much packed into the series. What an eclectic selection of founders we've had.
Yeah, it's been a great season. I just wanted to also say thank you to you as well, Laura, for coming on board, for season 4. It's been so fun working with you, and I'm really looking forward to season 5 as well.
Yeah, well, likewise. Thank you for the invitation. Very much looking forward to getting going again in September at some point. All the details to be sorted. So in terms of today then, Ollie, we've got a startup which is all about helping to treat depression.
We do indeed. And it's an episode with a bit of a difference today, Laura, because we're interviewing a CEO of a startup rather than the founder. So we have Erin Lee, who is in charge of Flow Neuroscience. And as you say, they're a startup all about trying to help and treat depression.
Yeah, which is such an important thing to be able to do. And I was really interested to hear exactly how they're a part of this solution. So let's begin then, shall we? Let's just jump straight into the interview.
Good afternoon, Erin. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, as I say, to have you here. Obviously, Flow Neuroscience, an amazing business solving one of the biggest problems in the world right now, which is depression. The World Health Organization estimate this to cost the global economy over 1 trillion per year, and 1 out of 4 people in the UK are currently suffering from mental health issues. So can you tell us a bit about how Flow Neuroscience came to be, and how your at-home headset helps treat depression?
Yeah, absolutely. So the company was founded by Daniel and Eric, our 2 co-founders, and it really sort of sprung from, as you said, the recognition of sort of the global epidemic nature of depression, but also really the lack of valid treatment options and alternatives. So Daniel is a clinical psychologist by training. He spent a lot of time in clinics treating sort of depression, PTSD, and effectively sort of the treatment options that you have are antidepressants and drugs. And while they do work for some users, the reality is, 60% of people have side effects. Less than a third of people will go on to see sort of effective treatment. And so Daniel was really like, there's got to be something better. And so he had been following this sort of out there concept of TDCS. There were some pivotal trials in 2017 that really showed some promise, and he sort of decided to roll the dice, and that's sort of how Flow was born. Was really out of the impetus, there must be a better treatment option for depression.
Wow. And Erin, talk to me a bit about the headset. So I've actually got a copy, but for the people on the audio version, you have to check out our socials. But I've got the actual headset here in front of me. So I'm just actually going to unbox it and bring it out. So talk to me about how it works, Erin.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty straightforward once you sort of get past sort of the different appearance. But effectively, the Flow platform has 2 parts. It has sort of our headset and our app. But let's start with the headset that you have on now. So that is a brain stimulation wearable. And what we do is we leverage transcranial direct stimulation, or TDCS, which is a mild electrical current, so less than you'd find in a household battery. And we're stimulating the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So it's quite a mouthful, but in effect, that is the area of the brain that's responsible for mood, emotion, impulse control. And what studies have shown is that when you're suffering from depression, there's often less activity in that region. And so what we're doing is we're stimulating those currents and reactivating that area of the brain. to sort of treat those symptoms like, brain fog, low mood, depression, etc. And that's in a nutshell really how it works. So quite straightforward.
Amazing. And I know that obviously it's being rolled out at the moment in the UK with the NHS trial. Can you talk to us a bit about how that's going so far?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we do have a few pilots with the Northamptonshire Trust, and we've been available direct to consumer over the counter for a little over 2.5 years. But as I mentioned earlier, our real sort of founding mission is to deliver an accessible and affordable treatment alternative. And the reality is that only really comes with reimbursed coverage or, coverage available via the NHS. And so we are working with the Northamptonshire Trust to trial a couple different things. One, let's see how users respond to a different option to antidepressants. How do clinicians respond? How does it fit in the pathway? Are there cost savings associated with using flow versus drugs? We believe that there are. And then we're also exploring some other user groups like potentially postpartum depression and sort of social care. So it's sort of early to say, but directionally it looks very positive.
Amazing. And talking about when Daniel took the bold decision to kind of launch the business, do you know what kind of validation did he do to ensure that this was a solution that actually people did want and need?
So we looked first, at the science, and I think fundamentally that's sort of core to who we are. We always try and lead with science and clinical evidence. And so we were actually the first company to run our own trial of the technology and the headset. And so first and foremost, we wanted to demonstrate that it works, right? And that, maybe if it doesn't work for 100% of users, it does work for the majority. And so that was the first step. And then I think what may be surprising to most people is that there's actually quite a bit of dissatisfaction with traditional treatment options today, right? And that's true of patients and clinicians. So a recent survey sort of showed that, over 75% of people would prefer a drug-free alternative. I think clinicians see every day the impact of side effects, ineffective results, withdrawal symptoms. And so there really was a hunger for something different, that could demonstrate effectiveness. And so that was sort of the validation that we needed.
Amazing, Erin. And I just wanted to ask a bit about your background. So I know you've got a career that you've spent building out teams with some of the biggest kind of tech titans out there, including Google,
Yeah.
Uber, Babylon Health. But I'm really interested to know what attracted you to the world of joining a startup, and how are you bringing your knowledge of world-class customer service to Flow Neuroscience?
Yeah, so I effectively, over the course of my career, I think, I've been very fortunate to work for some incredible companies, but I've really effectively been getting earlier and earlier stage. And so I think one of the things I've realized about myself is I really prefer to build things from scratch. I'm not the person that likes to go to meetings and talk about meetings and talk about the next meetings that come after that. And so getting earlier and earlier stage, transparently, I never started my career thinking about healthcare. I recognize that that's probably a very privileged perspective. I've always been very healthy. I've always had insurance. And so it was really not until Babylon where I sort of saw firsthand, really how terrible, quite frankly, the healthcare system is for most individuals, right? It's either better than nothing, or it's inaccessible, it's not affordable. And particularly, with mental health, I don't think people realize how badly that impacts physical health. And so, after 4.5 years at Babylon, I was really looking for, that next early stage company, but that was really doing something transformational. It wasn't looking to optimize around the edges or sort of play with supply networks or clinic, like somebody who was going to take a bold risk. And if it worked, it would sort of disrupt the industry, but maybe it would fail. And what Daniel and Eric were doing, in my mind, was really that transformational thing. And so then you asked a little bit about, okay, so what can we learn from, Uber and Google and even Babylon? And I think healthcare is really the last sort of frontier where patient experience is sort of not considered. I mean, some will argue that like the airline experience isn't great, but it's sort of take it or leave it. And I think what, Google does very well and Uber did very well was sort of this obsession about the experience, and is there this joy in what I'm doing? And that was just for ads or taxi rides. And I think, Babylon, we tried to bring that to healthcare, right? Could you enjoy a trip to the doctor? Could we make a clinician as accessible, as Netflix? And I think that's really what we're trying to do with Flow. Like, can you treat depression, which is a horrific illness, in a way that is simple and delightful and serves a user need?
And Erin, that leads me on nicely to my next question in terms of treating depression. What results are you seeing from your customers so far?
Yeah, so we see results that are 2 to 3 times as effective as drugs. We work for about 80% of users. So as I mentioned, we don't work for everyone, but for those that sort of go ahead and follow the 15 session over 3 weeks, it's about 5 sessions a week, initial stimulation protocol, 80% will see an improvement in depressive symptoms. And then, over 60% of users do go on to continue for 6 months. And some of that is around maintenance, and some of that is around sort of sticking to the dedicated focus on improving mental health and sort of addressing physical and sociological sort of elements. So the results are very compelling, and we're, razor focused on making sure that we continue to improve that.
And I know users can sort of log into an app that you've got as well to actually track their mood in real time. So how does that work hand in hand with the headset?
Yeah, so depression is really sort of a holistic illness. And so the headset for us treats sort of the physical components of depression that I mentioned. But there's also other elements like sleep, diet, exercise, things that you will discuss in therapy, for example. And so really what we wanted to do is empower users with that information, allow them to sort of track their own behaviors across sleep, mood, etc. And over time, that will allow us to personalize the experience and sort of surface more relevant content for a user who, may be struggling with sleep or diet. And for us, it's sort of like you don't get depressed overnight. And so you're not going to get better overnight. And so it's really about empowering people with the tools that they need to address their individual experience, because it's different for everyone.
And for the customers that are seeing an uplift in their mood and a reduction in anxiety, what are kind of the long-term implications? Are they encouraged to keep using the headset for the rest of their life, or how does that work?
So I think it's really a personal, and we've partnered with over 80 clinics. So many of our users do work with their clinicians to sort of figure out how Flow is going to fit into their life. I think the great thing about it is that you don't need to use Flow every day for the rest of your life. As we said, we sort of have that initial treatment of 3 weeks. We do encourage sort of a treatment, sort of continuation maintenance phase for, about 2 to 3 months. Many of our users do use it for 6 months. They like the habit of it. Yeah. And then many of them will stop, right? But depression can be cyclical. So even if you're in remission today, maybe in a year, something comes back, you lose a job, you have sort of a relationship issue. And the great thing about Flow is you can pick it back up and you can start again. And so again, we want people to keep it in their home, sort of use it as they need it. And that will depend really based on the individual.
Fantastic, Erin. And I know you've come into, obviously, as CEO of the company, but I believe you have actually got an equity stake in Flow. So I'm just wondering, what's the difference do you see between being a founder and actually running a business on behalf of a company? Is there any conflict there? I would hope it is. I guess I would say, like, my bias is I don't think you can come into a startup and not, particularly one as small as Flow, and not feel like a founder. Like, quite frankly, I think there's been a lot of buzz about startups over the last few years, and everyone's like, oh, it mints millionaires and billionaires. And the reality is, like, quite frankly, the vast majority of startups fail. And so my advice to people and my own sort of, guidance to myself is just, you have to do something that you're incredibly passionate about and fiercely committed to. It will eat your life in a good way, if you can control it. And so it can't be about sort of, of course it is about sort of running a business and the bottom line, but it has to, you have to think like a founder at a company this stage, regardless of the role. And I sort of say that to every member of our team. Like, every single person is a founder, whether it's of their function or, the role. So
a word about our sponsors. As a founder, cybersecurity isn't top of your priorities. Yet Alliance has identified cyber threats as one of the top 3 risks facing business globally. This is where Nova Blue comes in. Its founder, Steve Mason, was technical director with GCHQ.
He was in charge of keeping the nation safe from cyber threats. He set up Nova Blue to help keep businesses safe. Nova Blue are offering Founded and Grounded listeners a free cybersecurity health check. Simply go to nova-blue.co.uk/podcast offer.
Do something you're passionate about. That is the number one starting point, I think. Every time, that is the message that comes out loud and clear from all of our founders, and in this case, our CEO. But I just want to touch on the point about mental health. You know, yes, a lot of us have got a lot better at talking about it and maybe sharing some of our own experiences and how we're feeling. But it is a significant problem, and I'm fascinated how, with all the new developments in technology that we have, the ability to see a bit more about what's going on in the brain, which we no longer have to, cut someone's head open to kind of find out. Pharmacological answers have been there, for decades now, and that's been one of the key ways forward, alongside other therapies as well. But interesting to see what's happening here. I feel like this area is just going to grow, isn't it?
It's so exciting, and I think I heard on the radio this morning something saying about 1 in 4 people were on medication for depression in the UK.
Yeah,
and
that's right. Yeah,
they'd been on it for 5 or more years as well. So, you can't expect different results if you're having the same input. And I think it's great to see innovation in this area from Flow Neuroscience. And I think what's really encouraging is actually hearing from some of their initial customer base. I think they said that 88% of depressed patients who trialled the device were in remission after 6 weeks, which is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, especially as I know the story you're talking about, because it was about kind of getting on antidepressants, and perhaps they are working, but we don't know too much about the when you start to taper down and reduce them and try and come off of them, and whether it's the withdrawal from the drugs or whether it is the impact of a mental health condition, which obviously with something like this, I'm guessing is going to be slightly different because you're not putting a chemical into your body.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I think we're going to hear a lot more and find out a lot more developments. But this team, don't know anyone else who's doing anything quite like this. This makes it particularly interesting. It also must make it particularly tough, though. And I'm reminded of several people I've met over the years who've tried to kind of get into the NHS with products or services that they think might help. And how do you gain credibility in this area when what you're doing is completely new, and usually you require a huge amount of research, peer reviews, in order to get that credibility. So Ollie, I wonder what advice you might have from the people you've worked with about getting an in with the right people, especially in the world of health.
I mean, it's a tough cookie to crack, and obviously rightly so. I think, first of all, obviously Daniel's clinical background and his credibility in the industry have massively helped here. But that doesn't mean that it's been plain sailing, I'm sure. And I like what Erin said about obviously taking the regulation side of it very seriously, because that's obviously of utmost importance as well. But what I would say, if you're trying to break into the NHS and you don't have a medical background, I would highly recommend reaching out to your local AHSN, which stands for the Academic Health Science Network. There's 15 regional bodies throughout the UK, and essentially they bring together the NHS, industry, academia, the third sector, local organisations across the full spectrum of health and social care. So they're really responsible for improving health and generating economic growth locally. So they can really help you potentially trial products and services with the NHS and get that route to market. So I would highly recommend reaching out to your local AHSN and touching base with them.
I never heard of that. So there is a way. That's really good to know. Thank you, Ollie. One of the other key points, you flagged this right at the start, we usually have founders. Today we have a CEO. I know friends who set up businesses, and often in those first few years they're like, what am I? I'm everything. Am I the CEO? Am I the founder? What is the difference between the two?
It's a good question, Laura. And obviously if you're a founder, then you've got complete ownership over the business. Whereas obviously if you're coming in as a CEO, then you might have some equity. I think in Erin's case she does as well. But ultimately you don't have full ownership of the business, even though you're in charge of running it. So sometimes there can be a conflict here. And I think what I really like what Daniel and Eric have done is they've relinquished some of this control in the business. So lots of people compare starting a business to having a baby, and they've managed to let go of it, which is a hard thing to do. And I think it's great that they've got Erin on board. You know, they raised $9.3 million US in 2021 to grow the team. And obviously Erin came on board last year. I mean, she's a proven team builder with a very solid CV, working with some of the largest tech giants, including Babylon Health as well. And I think that, you know, ultimately being a founder and a CEO require different skills. And often founders don't make great CEOs, unfortunately.
Yeah, that I feel like she definitely comes in as a catalyst to move things forwards and to take on different parts of the business. Yeah, it's really interesting. Okay, along the way though, it doesn't all smell of roses, as we know. Behind the scenes there's always something that goes pear-shaped, so let's hear about some of Erin's favourite failures.
Gosh, there's a lot of failures. I would say, you know, I think for us, as I mentioned, our goal is really accessibility and affordability. And, you know, for many, they'll go on our website and they'll probably say, like, how can you say that when your device is priced at, you know, £399? Like, how do you see that as affordable? And we get it. And that's why we're partnering with the NHS. And that's why we're so focused on continuing to be sort of ruthless on costs and really making sure that we can get it into the hands of the people that need it. But when we launched, we really wanted to figure out if there was a better way to make it more affordable and accessible to people. And so we played with some free trials. We played with, like, you know, try it for 2 months, don't pay anything. We dropped the monthly subscription price. And the great thing was we got a ton of users. The bad thing was, like, most of them didn't ever open the device. They didn't use it. We had a ton of returns. People were super unhappy. And what we realized was there is some expectation setting that has to happen. And there is a benefit to some friction, right? Like, we want people to stop and think a little bit about, am I going to commit to this experience? Am I going to do the sessions? This is an economic investment for me today, but it's also a time investment, right? It's 30 minutes a day for 15 sessions. And so for us, we weren't getting the right type of users or people who hadn't done enough homework because it was too easy to purchase. And so we actually had to roll that back. And we gave up some growth to have a better user experience and an experience that fit better with sort of our target user. But it cost us a lot of money. It cost us a lot of time. It cost us, you know, I think some unhappy people who didn't really understand what they were getting. And so that was a pretty painful one. It took us a couple of months to get out of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So just to kind of summarize, you were kind of going for the opposite of Amazon. So rather than removing frictions, you were adding them into the journey.
Well, we have added them back a little bit, and I say that by we try and empower people with information, right? We're really all about choice, and so we want people to choose Flow, and we don't want price to be a barrier, and that's what we're going to work towards long term. But we found that if you remove that price barrier entirely, at least while we were still a new company, many people jumped in without sort of doing the initial research, like, what is it? How do I have to use it? You know, how long do I have to use it? And so there was a misalignment of expectations. We're doing a lot on education and awareness. And so we hope that people are more familiar with the technology so that when they come to Flow, they understand what they're signing up for, and then they have a great experience.
Interesting. And talking a bit about the kind of wider market, are there any competitors? Are you first to market? Where are you kind of positioned?
So I would say that, as I mentioned, we were sort of the first to run our trials. I think Daniel had incredible foresight there. And so we are first to market. What I will say, though, is we absolutely expect competition. And we know there are others out there in other countries that are doing similar things. And honestly, we think that's awesome, right? I think this is a global epidemic. It's a massive market. This is not winner take all. I think competition is great for the end consumer. And I think if we can have help sort of explaining and celebrating the technology, like, we'll take it. So there aren't any competition that I would point to today, but absolutely there will be in the next year or two.
It's really interesting because we've had a couple of past guests talking about creating their own category and being the first to market.
Yeah.
And actually they want people to come in because it educates consumers and it makes everybody play at the top of their game. And ultimately, as you say, it benefits the end consumer. So
it does.
I really like what you said there. Great stuff, Erin. And in terms of the industry, so obviously it is very heavily regulated, and rightly so. Can you talk to us a bit about how you've navigated the regulatory side?
There is no shortcuts there, right? And I think, we were the first, class 2, we're the only CE marked device in the UK. I won't mince words, like we do not mess around with regulation. I think it's one of the largest parts of our team. We work hand in hand with sort of BCI, MICRA, you name it. And so it is an investment, but that also sort of helps us build trust. And, honestly, we think regulation is important. Like, of course, it can be difficult to navigate as a startup that's not as well resourced as some of the larger competitors. But in general, there is a good reason why it exists. And, in our opinion, the worst thing that can happen is unregulated, other parties come in and they give everyone a bad name. And that's not something that we're interested in. This is a very serious topic. And so, that was sort of a major investment for us. It sort of drove our clinical trial. We're in the process of applying for FDA approval in the States. We had breakthrough designation in July of last year from the FDA, which was sort of a recognition of the work that we've done on the regulatory side, the clinical research side. And so we think that's important.
100%. And we talked at the start of the podcast about, 1 in 4 people here in the UK suffering from some form of mental illness. And, lots of founders will experience kind of self-doubt, imposter syndrome. So I'm just wondering about any moments of self-doubt that you've had in your career and how you've kind of overcome that.
I'm totally blanking on what it's called, but there's that curve, right? It's like the less you know, the more arrogant you are. I need to look it up. I'll come back to what it is. But I would say never have I been more confident than when I was just starting out. I knew everything. And, my dad used to say, I'm not young enough to know everything. And I finally understand. I think I doubt, of course you're going to question everything constantly. I think my goal is really just to lean into it. I think, the narrative that we see externally is that they're these superhuman gods, CEOs that are just, they're everything to everyone. They know, like Elon Musk, for example, right? Yeah. And I think maybe there are a few Elon Musks and Steve Jobs, although I think we're seeing some flaws there. That's not who I try to be. I have my flaws. I'm human. There's things that I'm good at, but my goal is to build really an incredible team that sort of supplements and complements my flaws, I guess, in that way. And I really do think, we're better together. And I think the more that people are open about, hey, I don't have all the answers. And I think in some ways Flow, because we're a new device in a new industry, in a sort of a category that no one's really done before, it's sort of very freeing because no one has the answer. And so you can talk to a lot of people and be like, hey, I don't know, like, what do you think? And I think it's a great, unifying factor in many ways. So I embrace it. I every day I realize how little I know, and that's just part of the journey, right?
Love that answer, Erin. Very, very honest, and I think it's a great mindset to have.
Yeah.
I'm keen to know about, building a very successful career and coming into Flow Neuroscience. What is kind of one sacrifice that you've made, either consciously or subconsciously?
Absolutely my personal life, and I think it was conscious for a while. I always said, I'm going to just commit to my career till I'm 34. And then I was like, oh, it's 35. And then it's, I'm coming up on 40. I think, I sort of felt like you've got one life. You've got to do the most that you can with that time. I think now that I'm older, I sort of appreciate what I did sacrifice. And I've been very fortunate to have an incredibly supportive family and partner. And that's been tremendous, but it has come at a cost. And I'm so proud of what I've done, and I wouldn't change a thing, but I am trying to be more conscious about sort of where I invest my time.
So the money then, Ollie, let's talk about this pricing and why it's so hard, also why it's so important, and how lots of us take a little bit of time just to get it right, and that's okay. But ultimately it's with the aim of, well, making your business sustainable and profitable, but finding your right client. And I thought this was a really interesting part of the conversation, especially as they're trying to educate a client as well around something that they don't know. But yeah, pricing, finding right clients, any pearls of wisdom on this? Is it always going to be a bit trial and error? What can you do?
You do have to test the market, and I think generally speaking, people do often undervalue their product or service, so they go too low, which I think is always a big mistake, because if you go higher, then it's easier to come down rather than raise pricing. So I'd always say go higher than you think you need to. I mean, in the case of this business, it's really hard because, you know, they're trying to solve this really complex problem, which, you know, is really hard to treat as well. And clearly I'm no expert in terms of depression and mental health. And I think the problem has so many awful effects in terms of the individual level, the family level, but also the wider society level, in terms of the NHS and the economy at large. So I think part of the complex nature of this is really understanding where the responsibility lies, and the lines are actually very blurred. Because obviously, you know, the government and the NHS is obviously trying to help, but, you know, mental health services are clearly underfunded and oversubscribed. So I think, you know, some individuals will take the matter into their own hands, and look at what's available on the private market. And, you know, if you've got £400 to spend on the headset, then great. You know, you could potentially buy it, but it's not just a monetary issue, it's obviously a psychological issue as well. And I think if the headset was available in the NHS for free, I know they're doing some trials at the moment, it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a higher uptake, because if people aren't actually purchasing it themselves, they're not investing in it, they might not be committed to it. So there's a very complex situation here where they've got to educate, get the pricing right. Also remember that some people aren't very au fait with tech and they don't like using tech. So it's a difficult issue to solve, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And there are lots of different factors that contribute towards someone's commitment to doing something. And in this scenario, one of the factors that often goes with depression is that you're not feeling like it, your lack of motivation. So it's I can imagine that this particular scenario is tricky, and I think about slightly different, but you know, working as a hypnotherapist, often people seek help, you know, privately. They'll be paying you know, their own money for it when they've reached a point of desperation and they really want to make a change. But even then, the fee you charge for something like that makes a difference, because you want to be able to help as many people as you can. But you also know that if you do put on free sessions, the drop-off point will be so much higher than if you'd put a charge in there. And you can apply that to loads of different things, can't you? Events, you know, the same thing. If you charge a £5 or a tenner, at least people have had some kind of commitment to it. Whereas if you say, I'm going to do this free thing because I want to be really great and helpful, you might not end up reaching everyone. It's so interesting and so tricky just to get it right. But yeah, don't be afraid to experiment, and probably make it a little bit more than what your initial thought is Ollie's advice on that one, which I think is really good. How much do you need to know before you can start? So this came up in the conversation about self-doubt, didn't it? And, you know, it's a frequent thing, this is, doubting what you're doing, worrying about it. But also what she said about, look, this is a new area, no one's got all the answers, and how kind of liberating that can be. So don't let this hold you back. You don't need to have hoovered up every publication. Some of this is our own personality type, isn't it? I can imagine entering the sphere and thinking I need to have read everything all the time and have loads of Google alerts saying every time the word depression is mentioned that I know exactly what's what. But that can actually really stop you from getting on and doing stuff as well. So I guess it's being aware of some of what your own personality is like here, isn't it? Because you can probably get going a bit more than you might think.
Yeah, I think when people are asking themselves that question about how much do you need to know before you can start, I think the short answer is less than you think, because, you know, you probably do have lots of the skills and knowledge already to actually get going. And obviously the proposition is likely to change from when you initially launch it. You know, your products and services constantly change, websites change, so don't worry about getting it right the first time.
Yeah. I do feel passionately about this. I think I go back to, and I think we said this right at the start when I first joined you, the way education is here in the UK, I felt very much it was like you have to be qualified before you can do something. Whereas now, all the people I watch flourishing in their business, they're learning as they do it, and they reach out to people around them with more, you know, experience, or who are neighbours to them, or who can offer something. And that's how they learn. You learn by making some mistakes. This idea, honestly, it drives me nuts, but I'm a product of it. That you have to somehow be qualified before you can even begin. It's just such a big block. So don't, for goodness sake, let that put you off.
Yeah, absolutely great advice there, Laura. And I think, you know, for a business like this, obviously it's slightly different in the sense that there's, you know, huge startup costs to get it off the ground, the regulation, the barriers, and the market research. But I'd say for other industries, the cost to getting started will be much lower. Generally speaking, like you say, it's your mindset that's holding you back rather than anything else. And actually you just need to have that conviction and confidence to get started, and put that sort of barrier to the back of your mind. And what I generally say is try and fall in love with the problem, not the solution that you're providing. So if you deeply understand the problem you're looking to solve, then it will be a lot easier to take your product or service to market, because you really have that true understanding of it. And absolutely what I'd say is, you know, build the track, lay the track as you're going around. Don't build it before you've got a train on it, you know, because learn as you go, and that's the best way to get started.
And as Ollie said, a very important point he just mentioned there, what is the problem you're seeking to solve? Be really clear about that. It's surprising how many people aren't. That's a little bit woolly, and just with a little bit of refinement, they can be absolutely clear about that, and then that makes it so much more straightforward. Let's look ahead, shall we, and find out from Erin what she thinks the future for Flow Neuroscience is looking like.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with Flow. So in the next 5 years, I hope that we are available to everyone in the UK, obviously, who, you know, qualifies. I would love for us not to have a market and that no one is depressed, but unfortunately, I don't think that's reality. So I would love for us to be available to those that need it in the UK. I would love for us to be in the US as a frontline treatment, and that will take some very audacious efforts. You know, I think drugs have been the status quo and the incumbent for a while, and we are very small and scrappy, but I think we have, you know, the support of our users and the support of science. And I do think you are seeing a shift in what people expect. And so if you look at things like, you know, speaking more broadly about what I think we can see in healthcare, if you look at sort of the degree of personalization you see on Amazon Prime or Netflix, or even your ads, like they're incredibly deeply predictive, right? Instagram is so good at selling me stuff, right? And I think we should see more of that in healthcare. For the most part, you know, clinicians are overworked, which means they don't have time to evaluate all of the new trends or protocols, which means that basically people are treated one size fits all. And that's, you know, bluntly bullshit. And I think people are waking up to that, and they're saying, I want to be my own doctor. Like, treat me as a person. Don't see me as one of 100. And so I think things like ChatGPT will empower users to access information that might have been otherwise inaccessible. Like, do I think it will replace clinicians entirely? No. But I think it will give you the ability to review clinical, you know, studies and protocols in a way that maybe would have been inaccessible before. I think you'll see a real desire for more personalized treatments. So whether that's non-drug, drug plus something else. I think we obviously follow very closely the brain-computer interfaces, and some of what they're doing for, you know, paralysis and stroke is incredible. Do I think that will be sort of status quo in 5 years? No, but I could be wrong. And so really, I think what I'm excited about is actually people taking back control of their treatment and really getting, you know, I think the healthcare experience that they deserve, which is meant for them and is fully personalized for them.
Amazing insight into the future there, Erin, so thank you for that. I just
Yeah,
wanted to ask a bit about, obviously, the slight conflict there with the kind of the big pharma companies. Have they got a hidden agenda not to see you succeed?
I don't think so. I think, for many people, and I'll say, for some people, drugs work very well. And, I think that's awesome. And I would never take that away. I think they've been tremendously helpful for people in my own family. But as I mentioned, for 2/3 of users, they aren't. And unfortunately, those users are sort of left behind. So on the one hand, I want to be respectful of what Big Pharma has done. I don't think they've been incentivized to, branch outside of drugs, but why would they? That's their bread and butter. And so, personally, we know that many of our users use Flow in tandem with drugs, obviously under the supervision of clinicians. We know that many of our users are able to take a lower dose, which may reduce side effects, or when it's time to come off drugs, it can tamper or stop their withdrawal symptoms, again, with a clinician. And so we actually think there's a very symbiotic relationship, and we would love to partner with Big Pharma. I think, again, our goal is not to be the end all be all to everyone, it's to improve choice. And so if we can do that with drugs, great. If we can do it alone, great. If they can do it just with drugs, great. But at the end of the day, users win, right? So patients win, and that's our goal.
100%. I was kind of thinking in the back of my mind there must be some scope for collaboration rather than competition.
Absolutely. Yes. Call me, Pfizer, if you want to work with us. Call me.
Here we go. If you're listening.
Yeah.
Great stuff. The next part of the show, Erin, is a chance for you to ask our listeners a question, and I know you had something in mind.
Okay. So my question is, by the end of this decade, so by 2030, the leading cause of death and illness globally is expected to be colon cancer, A, heart disease, B, war-related deaths and murder, C, or depression, D.
Thank you very much. We'll get some answers to that on our socials and feed it back to you. The next part of the show, Erin, is a key tenet of Founded and Grounded. So we ask everybody who comes on the show to just distill down one piece of advice for somebody who is an early stage founder or somebody who's thinking of starting a business. So what would that one piece of advice be?
Wow, that's a tough one. I guess what I would say is, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And by that, I mean, I think you have to be obsessive. So don't do it because you want to get rich. Don't do it because you want to be on the cover of Forbes or you want fame. Honestly, there's easier ways to do it. But if it's something that you're obsessive about and you're committed to, then go for it. And don't be afraid and don't quit. So I think almost anything is possible if you're willing to be tenacious and you're passionate about something. And that sounds very woo-woo, but it's very true. Far more things are possible with just some effort and commitment. So just make sure you're in it for the right reason.
Love that answer. And if you're going to fail, you may as well fail doing something you like, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Great stuff. And where can people find out a bit more about Flow Neuroscience and you personally?
Yeah, so you can find all about Flow at flowneuroscience.com. We've got a link to all of our clinical studies. We've got user testimonials. You can read more or watch a video on how the device works. You can hear from some of our clinicians. So that's all flowneuroscience.com. I'm far less interesting than our product, but if anyone has questions, you can always reach me at Erin at flowneuroscience.com or on LinkedIn. I'm Erin Lee.
Amazing, Erin. Thank you for that. Last question, which is a bit of a curveball. If I knew you better, what's one question I would have asked you?
If you knew me better. That's a great question. I don't know. Maybe how I've made it as far as I have with such a potty mouth. I have actually a tendency for profanity, which isn't always seen as the most professional. But I don't know. I think I try to be pretty transparent. So in general, I think people feel like they probably know me pretty well, even if they don't. So
what would be the answer then to that question in terms of building your career?
I think, and I am not encouraging people to go to the office and start cussing, or swearing. But I think in general, I think people feel like you've got to put on this facade and be this worker bee, this just this image that we have. And in general, I find that people respond very well to authenticity. That doesn't give you an excuse to be an asshole, but it means like it's okay to be yourself. And I think that means being honest. I think that means admitting when you've made a mistake. I think being humble, right? And that sort of, we all have our quirks. And so unfortunately, like what you see is what you get with me, but on the flip side, what you see is what you get. So I think that would be my answer.
Love that, Erin. And yeah, I completely agree. I think if you're not showing up as your authentic self, then you're putting on that mask and you're not being true to yourself. And there's going to be inner conflict there, which is going to have a long-term consequence on your career, isn't it? So.
Well, and how boring if we're all the same, honestly. Like, how boring. So
100%. And Erin, is there anything that you would like to add or that I haven't asked you as part of the podcast?
No, I think these are very good questions. Very good food for thought.
Amazing. Erin, well, listen, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Same. Thank you.
Some really interesting future gazing there, of touching on lots of different things. ChatGPT is one of them. Personalized, more and more personalized healthcare, but all to try and improve choice for people. One of the things Erin said, though, that struck a chord with both of us, I know, is when she was saying about being yourself. And she's got a bit of a potty mouth by her own admission, but just, you don't need to put on this front. And again, I expect lots of us started and had an idea of what you had to look like or be like, or have had at different points in our business life. And it's just brilliant when I see people who actually are just themselves doing their business. It's like, yes, you're the ones who stand out the most.
I absolutely love this, from a seasoned CEO, because, generally speaking, CEOs sometimes can be seen as a bit corporate, maybe lack a bit of personality. But I love how Erin is just encouraging everyone to be their true kind of authentic self, and sort of remove their work mask as well, because I think then you can be absolutely operating at your best if you're doing that.
Yeah. So here for all of that. And also what she said about doing it for the right reasons, her piece of advice: whatever you're doing, you should do it for the right reasons, and then be obsessive about it. Yeah, it's what you said, isn't it? It's that being in love with trying to sort the problem, and that deep understanding of the problem, really caring about that and why that matters to people. Yeah,
I mean, if you're doing it for the money, then you're only going to last so long. One thing that I can guarantee being a founder is that it's going to be a very long ride with so many ups and downs. So you better be damn well sure that you're motivated by the right reasons rather than just monetary ones, because otherwise your motivation is just going to tail off and you're probably going to close the business or sell it to somebody else who's more passionate about it.
And it is a wonderful feeling when it does just click, when it feels like this is your thing. This is why you're getting up every morning. This is why you might make the sacrifices that we know, people do have to make along the way. Because this is your thing. This is what you care deeply about. So it's a great kind of state and feeling to be in when you find it. Ollie, we're almost at the end of this podcast, which means we're almost at the end of series 4, which is extraordinary. Let's catch up with Samantha now, shall we, to find out what you have been saying on social about our previous entrepreneur and some of the points that they raised in the last podcast. So let's just have a little catch up of who's been saying what.
Last episode, our penultimate episode of this season, we spoke to Cameron Grant about his journey along with his brother setting up Unyoked with the simple goal of reconnecting people back with nature. Such an amazing story of creativity, clarity, and calm. It's so important to get out there in nature, and especially for entrepreneurs. So if you're a founder stuck in a rut, suffering with mental fatigue, low productivity, swapping screen time for green time is one of these things that's really obvious, but so hard to do. So hearing the science behind it and how the brothers started out with a couple of cabins in the wild in their homeland of Australia, all the way through to becoming a globally recognized nature brand closing in on 100 sustainable off-grid cabins in 4 countries was an amazing story to listen to, and so important for those of us in business who need to remind ourselves to take that time to switch off and reconnect with nature. Absolute bliss, and definitely one to think about if you are in that phase in your business, in your mindset right now. But of course, we spoke to Cameron about what his question for you was, as all of our guests come along with a question for you, our listeners. And Cam asked you which founder was or is known to use nature in their routines to help them think and come up with better ideas. Our options were Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Phil Knight, or all of the above. Now, you responded, and we had about 25% of you say Bill Gates, 17% of you say Steve Jobs, only 8% of you say Phil Knight, and correctly, 50% of you say all of the above. The answer is all of the above. All of these founders really utilize nature in their routines. It is such an important tool for getting that clarity, getting the space to think, and getting the correct mindset to help you in your business and help you grow. So fantastic to see so many of you knowing that all of them really utilize nature in their business. So if you'd like to hear more about how nature helps with that process, how important it is for business, and how to bring it into your day to day, then I definitely recommend checking out our last episode. As usual, if you have any thoughts on this, or if you listen back to the episode on replay at a later date, then please do come and share your thoughts, your answers to the question, your own experiences of how nature helps you in your business on any of our social media platforms. We love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and we would love to hear from you.
Fabulous. Right. Well, you know where to find us. You know that Ollie and I are going to be off taking a well-deserved rest or break this summer and bringing Series 4 to a close. But we really look forward to being back with you around mid-September. Just keep an eye on our social media because we'll trail it all on there. But thank you so much for listening. It's been great to be part of this and to be here with you too, Ollie. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening, and can't wait for season 5 to launch in September.